like to start this rules committee meeting. Go around the table, identify ourselves for the record. Forrest, we'll start with you and work our way around.
Forrest Dunbar.
Pete Peterson. Tim
Bill Evans.
John Middleton. Bill Starr.
Elby Breda.
Dick Cheney.
Mike Chadwick, internal audit.
Scott Lee, internal audit.
Elizabeth Stanley, Parks and Rec.
Josh Trainer, Parks and Recreation.
Bill Fall City Municipal Attorney. Ralph Dwyer, Municipal Assistant Municipal Attorney.
Rose Wally, Assembly Budget Analyst. Amanda Mulder, Clerk's Office.
And Amy Dabrowski is online with us. Now, I understand that the clerk's office invited the members of this board to attend this meeting. Is that correct, Amanda? Do you know?
Yes. I know
That's a
firsthand.
good voice.
I'm sorry, if I may, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
I confirmed with the clerk this morning that they were invited.
Okay.
Thank you.
We've got the audit in front of us. Let's go through the audit. Mike, you want to go over it with us?
Sure.
The salient points?
Sure. As part of our audit plan this year, at the request of Parks and Recreation, they submitted this request to do an audit of the McDonald Center. We performed the audit and we have 9 findings and recommendations. This was a contract compliance audit with the current contract that they have. The first finding that we have on page 2 is the contractor did not remit to the municipality the net profits that were earned in 2013 and 15. It totaled $59,000. Now on page 3, there was an adjustment made to that. So what's owed is about $30,000. On page 4, we have a finding where the monthly reserve account payments, although they were made, they were not made timely. On page 5, our third finding, an annual inventory had not been performed as required by the contract. On page 6, we had some expenditures were not approved, that the contractor did not obtain prior written approval from the municipality for these expenditures like they should have. On page 7, we have finding 5, where there was a professional services contract that had not been approved. And finding 6 is subcontractor requirements had not always been followed. And then on page 9, the annual budget had been submitted late, and at the bottom of page 9, a barter transaction had been incorrectly recorded. And our last finding was insurance requirements had not been met.
Mr. Starr.
Just speaking out loud here with no questions. Thanks, Mike. It's kind of a repeat of audit chair. We had the audit hearing on this audit report some time back, a couple weeks ago. Same sort of presentation, but one of the recommendations after that was to sort of include the body of the whole here through this committee for a couple different reasons. John Rada, our Parks and Rec director, which I'll educate you, is that there's 2 parks departments. John Rada just so happens to wear the hats for both of them. Chudiak Eagle River area has a Parks and Rec department. We tax ourselves for that, manage it ourselves, and John Rada is the director of the Eagle River Parks and Rec. He also is, of course, the director for the overall Anchorage Parks and Rec. He's the contract administrator designated by the contract which we have with the Fire Lake Marine Management Company, as it's known. So there's not direct management of the McDonald Center from municipal employees. We have a contracted agency, not unlike SMG. Some of the history of that, I'll paraphrase. I may be accused of leaving stuff out, like sometimes can, but what's happened in that area, particularly the McDonald Center, is it's grown up. It used to sort of be a little bit in an affectionate way, kind of a small ice rink with a clubhouse or thereabouts. And it's since been a center of attention for our taxes and our capital programs. And so it's probably one of the best facilities in the industry that we have in serving both the ice skaters, the hockey clubs, all those figure skaters, the regular skaters for fun, as well as now there's an attached indoor field for soccer and other practices. There's also a track, indoor track for that. Gorgeous. Probably estimated value of over $5 million now. Gorgeous. Paid off free and clear. And we operate now through this operating group. Several years ago, under the George Michaelis urging, the Flamme contract was up. And it made us all a little bit nervous on Chugach Eagle River that it was going to be out for a general regular bid. That was sort of the buzz in our neighborhood, was we don't want somebody from out of state managing our facilities. We prefer that, and I'll say, we didn't want SMG model. It was kind of the same year when we were dealing with Sullivan Arenas conditions in Ben Boki and some of that. So we, John Rada, myself, and Amy probably, or Debbie at that time, was interested in more of a sole source direct let contract, and that's what we ended up doing. So Flamme got that opportunity to get sort of a sole source bid arrangement. I'll say at that time too, there was some drama that the facility condition was pretty poor. It was unsanitary. There was a security issue and some of that. Mr. Rada, as contract administrator, kind of really came down on that entity around that whole conversation. So part of that conversation between John and I was, let's not let it falter. Let's keep the attention on it. And we called for this audit to be part of the audit plan, or requested audit from basically the administration, called for this audit. I'm concerned for a couple different reasons. It came to light a little bit at the audit committee meeting. John's the contract administrator, and I talked to him. He's very active in our community from a lot of different perspectives, including hands-on everywhere. There has been, maybe gently call it a personality conflict or a rub between the contract administrator and the board, the contract administrator and the employee out there. So there's a little bit of, I'll put on the record, a little bit of drama. I mean, there's a little bit of stuff there. So one of the aspects that we have is the contract administrator, our parks directors, mechanisms or effectiveness in dealing with situations like this or others. There's a little bit of pushback. There's a lot of pride and ownership. I kind of wish the board had made an interest to show up to correct the measures, but without saying it deliberately, that's kind of what we're finding, is they don't feel accountable to the circumstances of the operation and management of that facility. Which, from my perspective, been doing this a while, it was fine when it was just kind of a good old boys club, but we've ramped it up to where we need sort of the professional support, and we can't let that asset slip. As well as, it's a significant asset that could contribute a good share of money to the bottom line of the municipality. That's the idea, is that it's a non-profit form company. If they generate revenues in excess of operating costs, it goes back to the meeting. In our case, it goes into the reserve funds for Chugach Eagle River Parks and Rec, which supports the facility. Area-wide does not. So in some cases, it's a local matter, but I think it sets the precedent. I take responsibility for urging the sole source contract. I think we felt like we had that board of directors oversight. We have a separate Parks and Rec board with John's interest, and we did get a good cleanup. The facility got sanitized, and we felt good. We put another $1.5 million into ice. It was our first new ice replacement unit. Some of the members here helped with that appropriation. That ice arena is up and running great. The back story also is that there was several times where the Flamme group came to the municipality and said, during the ice construction, we can't make our bills because we can't charge rent for ice skating, we need money. So there was several appropriations that this body approved, which was $50,000 in some cases earlier in that, and so we gave Flamme just basically direct money. So there's a backstory there. The other thing was they came to the Parks and Rec board and the contract administrator, Flamme did, saying that they couldn't survive with the ice rates the way that they were. So when you announce to 600 families or 700 families and 12 really highly organized Mustang hockey players that you're going to raise the ice from 290 to 325, they go a little bit ballistic. So for further disclosure, again, we've shown now that they've made a profit. And there's a little bit of a problem with that, is they first haven't given the profits back to that group that they're required to, which is the Parks and Rec Reserve Fund, or had a reconversation with, do they need to continue to charge $325 for ice time? So what I did as the area rep was I reached out to legal first with some of the deficiencies noted in the audit report. Would there be grounds for breach of contract? And I got a client issued response from Mr. Dewey to me because I asked the question. That makes sense. I won't paraphrase him, but he did give me some guidance in that if it's possible to remedy the breach items or the concerns inside the audit and other things, would that be a good course of action? And I contemplated that, talked with Amy and John and Elvie and Dick a little bit, just to see what the pulse would be. So that's what you have in front of you is an interest to sort of provide guidelines and deadlines. I don't want to go through every one of them, but the idea that there's remedy actions that I'm offering out here, I would like to have a dialogue with the board of directors in an arena. So what I suggested early on was before we offer remedies, let's see the willingness to be responsible here. And unless there was a significant breakdown in communication, I think we just got this. So I'm not certain that I want to move this forward as a recommendation yet until we get assurances that we'll do that. One of the things, and sorry for rambling here, but one of my
So I'm gonna ask our
One of my
secretary
interests
clerk
in-
if they were notified on the record.
We'll do that in a minute. One of my interests is to try to get the, let them get a little bit more professional in their approach. And ways I wanted to do that is illustrate them. So I'll move you to the solutions in that I asked for the physical audit to be accompanied by somebody in internal audit as well. That acts professional, knows how to do a good audit, can record it, can reconcile the audit with perhaps missing supplies. The suggestion that they meet up with the CFO to handle timely or CFO designee from the finance perspective is to bring the city hall and show them how important it is to deposit money on time, talk to them about fund balances, and talk to them about some of that. So to work with our purchasing group, and then the other suggestion is to make sure that they don't purchase outside of the contract terms as well as they handle the purchasing guidelines within the municipality under Title 7, Section 7 of our code talks about fair market bidding, and you can't just give the contract to your cousin for accounting. So when we have that exposure, I want to amp up their ability to be professional, but understand that it's serious enough for us to intercede if they don't. And that's not a threat. It's just we've got a pretty healthy facility, and I don't want to be caught at the switch here in a place that isn't healthy. And we don't have good current dialogue between the contract administrator and the management board or the individual manager. I'll digress just a little bit. The board is high school coaches, it's the hockey league players, it's the fun club, if you will, is the board of directors. And there's no insult in that at all. It's helpful that they engage in the community from invested persons. The physical manager of the property is a guy named Reed McDonald. The facility is named after Harry McDonald, who died in a plane crash. And the facility designates an idea. Reed McDonald running the facility as well. So there's that whole community interest and community participation. So I'm perplexed. I don't have the outreach. I have, my first one is give us somebody on the board that will take responsibility for all this. And then my last comment is if they can reconcile and remedy, that they report to the assembly at an assembly meeting, that they fix the problems, and all as well as report to our board of directors, and then of course the things that are on the list as well. So my interest is to get them talking, give them some remedial time, and if not, my suggestion would be for each of them and go off the bids.
Thank you. I'll get you in a second, John. Barbara, was the board notified of this meeting?
Yes, Mr. Trainee, at the request of the chair through Mr. Starr's request, the clerk's office asked John Rada for the contact information for the board. I believe that the chair was copied on the email when John got back to us with their contact information. The staff emailed the board because that was the only contact info that we had, and they got the same notice that you did for the Rules Committee meeting. That was a public hearing on the Harry J. McDonald Center audit. So that's the same email. There wasn't anything specific in the body that I'll let you know. Dear board members, please, please come and report to the assembly. So I will tell you, it didn't have anything specific. It was the same notice that you got.
But the subject was this item.
That is correct. That was the only thing in the subject.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
And I can't interrupt, I can't validate from John, but I'm pretty certain that John had a conversation with Reed McDonald that this was occurring. That's almost what I know, but I don't quote me on that till I know, but I don't think it was a surprise to them. So,
John?
Well, I just, when Phil mentioned who was on the board, they might all be on board right now. Is that possible?
it is, but this is pretty serious. It could have sent the employee. Reed would represent the board as well. He oftentimes does. We didn't invite the Parks and Rec board members. It's not related. They don't authorize the contract per se. They authorize the spending plan. But the Parks and Rec, our Parks and Rec board doesn't really have anything to do with the day-to-day of the operations. It's Flammy and their designated employee, Reed McDonald.
So are we going to look in detail at this now? Or
I'm
Well,
not
I think
speaking.
you should go through every one of those points so we get down to that.
Can we listen to Ralph a little bit? Because
We can.
I don't want to put you on the spot. You answered my question was, based on your review of their contract, you find breach. I will also say that one of your suggestions was, in your opinion, it wasn't any too critical, but also the remedy suggestion, which I was kind of doing anyhow. But is there grounds for breach?
Yes, I looked at the audit report, and I looked at the contract, and yes, there are adequate grounds to declare a default. You could, under the remedies, you could terminate the contract, you could offset some of the default, defensive default, you can sue for damages, you can kick them out. You got the whole panoply of remedies. But when you look at the defaults, the nature of the defaults, they're so varied and many of them insignificant. Now, fair to say surpluses, that is significant, 30,000. That's significant, but others are relatively insignificant and more correctly, they're curable. And now, Bill's backstory and history of this explains a lot that there's just somewhat of a vacuum. There's not a good communication. And so I think primary, as I recommended to Bill, although there's grounds to declare a default, we would first need to have a proper notice and opportunity to cure. But if that didn't work, yes, we could declare a default. I'm not sure that's the best approach. I think Bill's recommendations have a lot of merit. Working with them, trying to get that dialogue going, put some sideboards on the contract, have a little bit more active management of the contract in the facility.
So to answer your question, Mr. Wilson, that's what I was, with his answer there, then I will go through each point if you want, but I didn't circulate the legal because it's typically between clients and it didn't make sense to do that. We're up here, so that's all. I appreciate it.
John, I've got 4 other people.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Tim?
Yeah, a good presentation, and I can understand that one time. But I guess the questions that I had, were can they learn? Will they learn? And is this what they really want to do? Right? We're giving them another chance, but not if they don't realize that they screwed up and change is necessary, then we've got to do something. And so I think a little more attention, a little more direct help, assistance, if you will, in terms of the proper management. It's just the trouble you have all over the place with a volunteer board, folks that don't do it professionally. And you're absolutely right in your concern over the expenditure that went into it and the lot of quality of the facility. You got to protect it one way or another. And I guess it's just a question, are we at that point where we want to give it a try again, or we need to make a change, or do we want to take something in the middle and have one person go out and help or something like that?
Phil, sir?
Yeah.
Just for full disclosure, I do have 4 grandkids that skate there occasionally.
Oh, so you're confident.
I don't pay the bills. Just to let you know, I do have grandkids. There's as many grandkids as I have, they're all over town. Nobody?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to start out by thanking Mr. Thor and Mr. Bosky, their area, for having concerns, because I certainly had concerns when I read the audit. And I have a question to Josh Duran, if I may. Mr. Starr said he thinks that Mr. Rada contacted Mr. McDonald about this meeting. Do you know if he did or not?
Yeah, we really don't know anything on this topic. We're
Okay.
just here.
All right, thank you. But the fact of the matter is that our clerk did, and I believe it was last week, and the fact that there was no response, but it's here today, it really concerns me. It's kind of like blatant rudeness. And so what I really like to see, Mr. Starr, if I may, Mr. Chairman,
Good night.
or somebody else could do it, I want for the record, this contract to be read into the record. And so hopefully, maybe the group will listen to the tape, and then have this in hand and agree to the terms.
Sure.
So that we can move on, with accepting this audit for now anyway. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I've got 3 more. Forrest, you're next, right?
Thank you. So when I first read this audit, it sort of made my hair stand up, and I came into your office and immediately started talking to you about it. So this is a question for you and perhaps for you, Bill. And I think I know the answer, but I just kind of want it on the record. So, as the attorney just said, most of these things are fairly minor. But the $30,000, to me, the real question is, was this just incompetence and they sort of didn't realize and it slipped through? Or did they get caught? Did we catch them basically intentionally withholding money? And that, to me, very much drives what our response is going to be. So could you please just speak to that? And Bill, if you want to comment on that too, I'd appreciate it.
Well, Mr. Dunbar, through the chair, we didn't see anything that was criminal activity here. What we did see generally as we looked at this contract and the contract abuse and the way that they were addressing their duties and obligations was basically complacency and lackadaisical. They've had this for a very long time. Fire Lake Arena Management has been in existence since the mid-1980s. We've had that contract. The board has been in existence since that time. I believe some of the current board members were the board members back then. So this has been around a long time. I think they knew about the payments that should have been made. They just didn't make those payments, and we caught them.
Or sure.
Bill, do you want to comment on that? I mean, the way you just described it, it sounds intentional. It sounds like we got caught. They got caught with their hand because each other.
I think it was a conscious decision to not put the money back in the reserve. They know how to do it, and they've done it before. They attempted to pay back some of the borrowed money, so there's a history of them making payments. I think they just chose not to and felt like they were going to generate their own reserves, and that's just not the way we do it. We can't allow that to occur for a couple of different reasons. Is the accountability of money outside the budget. If I can just digress a little bit, and I don't want to challenge you on that, I don't feel like the findings are insignificant. For example, the inventory is tied to, there's millions of dollars of stuff out there. We just spent a whole new ice system, there's new Zamboni, there's lots of stuff there that the municipality owns. Fire Lake Arena doesn't own any of it. We own it all as a municipality. Secondarily, things like tendering their operating budget ahead of time establishes a spending plan. So when they say they're going to spend $600 in accounting, and they spend $17,000 in accounting, or maybe wrong example, then they're expending beyond their approved budget, and that's the controls that we have in the system. So the idea that we need to get their budget timely is helpful. So the interpretation that some of it's minor and we missed the deadline, we missed the date. To me, I didn't find that any of them were that insignificant. With what I told you when I got here was the perception of the attitude towards the delivery of the product. It seemed to be a little bit like, hey, we got our contract, we've been doing this for years, leave us alone. Well, that was fine when you had a small group and you could get away with it. And granted, Eagle River Chudiak's known for being an independent bunch. They don't like City Hall and all the other stuff, but I live there and I'm sometimes in that same camp. But this asset is too big, it generates too much money, and when it gets out of control, we're going to have to come in and rescue the place if it gets that far. And I'm not saying that it is, we're delivering a good product, But I think we're on the edge here of being able to do that. So if that answers your question, I think they made a conscious decision to not give us the money. And that's not the protocol based on contract. Again, emphasis is on nonprofit.
I guess kind of one brief follow-up to that. So, what I'm looking for here is intent. Maybe it's not criminal exactly, but sort of malfeasance. You're saying that they knew what they were doing and they didn't give us money. But if they took that money and put it into their own reserve account with the idea of, well, we're going to use this to help this ice rink, that's one thing versus some kind of skimming or some other kind of. Then we're talking
Some other
very,
kind of
very
Ponzi
serious.
scheme.
Yeah.
And what do you think about that?
Well, one of the things that I put in here, and if I can, is just
Go ahead.
where to go. I didn't know who else was in the
I
queue
think
over there.
Pete's
But
next, and we're going to get him as soon as you're done.
There's two aspects of my suggestions that speak to the matter in being able to investigate a little further. And one is sort of a review of the reserve account deposit procedures that shall occur, and I want that review to be both, with the CFO or his designee to ensure timely deposits and contract compliance. So partly is I wanted to be reemphasized that they have to do it based on contracts, and then the mechanism is pretty clear on how to do it if they've missed it. But then further, it's down here where the second below that is Fire Lake Management Arena and the internal auditor and MOA purchasing shall review any purchases or professional service contracts for 2016 that may have violated Title VII purchasing codes. This review shall also include any non-budgeted or over-budget purchases. This is for 16. This review and summary findings shall occur prior to December 31st of 2016. These audit findings are based on 15, and they're less current than they would be through 16. But how those ideas of intentional spending outside the budgeted items, that will illustrate, in my opinion, if it's intentional or deliberate. You don't just miss a $17,000 county contract.
Yeah, I want to see if there's any $13,000 purchase of the cakes from their daughter, for example.
Yeah, I went down, one of the audit findings was the expansion of their accounts receivable. I wanted to know if their accounts receivable, I'll give you an example of investigations further that I've done. Their accounts receivable, I thought that they were comping nice time to their buddies or they were just writing off stuff, but it doesn't appear to be that. From what I can see, the accounts receivable in the net 90 payment plan, they don't have anybody that's been out for 36 months. They're extended out about $119,000 in receivables. So in terms of collecting the money, I hope they don't start writing things off just because that's a good guy on their hockey team or my son's on that team. So it certainly leads to that, and these are tough accusations put on the record. But unless we have accountability back, I don't know. I don't want to overreact either. But by the same token, they've been doing this for a long time, so Mr. Dunbar, they know how to do it. I think consciously they're just not. And so with these other two mechanisms in there, and if you want me to, I can go through the other ones. That was too.
Let me get Pete done, and then we'll go on to you in a second. Pete?
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I was going to ask Mr. Chadwick or Mr. Lee, when you went to do the audit, did they seem cooperative, or were they hostile, or what was their attitude?
Mr. Peterson, through the chair, they were cooperative. They were friendly. They weren't hostile. We did the audit during their slow season, during the summer. We did have a little bit of trouble touching bases with them because of their various summer schedules that they keep. But overall, they were cooperative.
And just one additional thing, Bill just mentioned the review of the reserve account deposit procedures. Would it be a solution just to send them a reminder every once in a while via email or something, just to sort of make sure they knew that it was coming time to do that? I mean, I want to try to be user friendly because, I understand this is out in Eagle River and they're not always real pleased with some of the things that we do down here at City Hall, so.
Yeah, if you want an answer to that, they know how to do it. I guess the link back to the CFO was that, and then it's right in the contract that it's specified to do this, where we go under contractual basis of breach is that, they need to do it, and they have been doing it, hit or miss, but I want to find out inside their organization who decides that they don't. And the ramifications of them having surplus cash are frustrating for us when we have to talk to midget hockey players of why they're having trouble making their payments is because we've raised their ice rates.
Right.
You know, so we want to have that dialogue as well as related to that, and we want to get our new money from the contract. You know, it's at least a NUSA type of arrangement where we get payments on the facility we own. So pretty annual.
Yes.
Amy, are you online, ma'am?
Yep, I'm here.
Any comments on this from you?
No, Bill's pretty covered it pretty well.
Thank you. But we're going to go to you in a second. I just want to let the body keep in mind that we're the ones responsible for this. The assembly. It's our role. Whether we want to get involved or not, we have to. It's our obligation when we run for office, stuff like that. So, Bill?
Yeah, I appreciate, Ms. Gray Jackson wanting to put this on the record so if they need to review the tapes, they can. I covered two of the suggestions from my perspective. Of course, they haven't been adopted here. I'm hoping to get some feedback or we take some sort of action how to do that. But one of the things is the communication link. That's the first one. And so a planning board appointed liaison shall interface with the contract administrator, internal audit, and the assembly as required through December 31st concerning audit findings and other corrective measures. And I'll speak to that as an interest to grab a hold of somebody that takes responsibility to say, all right, we've got this list of things that need to get fixed. We'll work that out, whether that's the board president or Reed McDonald himself or somebody else that's associated and appointed by planning so that we can get a hold of them and give them the urgency and the interest. And then, as you have indicated, give them mechanisms to do the corrective measures. As well as exposure to the other things that are important to us, the CFOs and the purchasing director. I didn't mention legal, but those resources need to have oversight. So the second suggestion on corrective and compliance guidelines would be financial surpluses as noted in the audit findings shall be deposited in the MOA, which is really the Chugiak Eagle River Parks and Facility Reserve account prior to November or December 31st of 2016. That one speaks for itself. They have ongoing monthly payments required as well as a past due, and we need to get caught up. So an asset inventory and reconciliation shall occur prior to December 31st of 2016. This physical inventory shall include the contract administrator and appointed internal audit representative. So that means audit tags on new equipment, audit tags, property, municipality, anchors with an asset number, and then also what I emphasize is the reconciliation. Are we missing stuff? Where's the brooms and mops and all that stuff becomes part of that. So it's fairly significant, as well as when the contract administrator goes through there, they can look at things like condition. This is ammonia getting services, the ice arena, boiler getting maintained, so there's a reason to look at it for other reasons as to know that it still exists. So the inventory and reconciliation is important to me from that. The next one would be an updated insurance binder listing the MOA and Chugiak Eagle River Parks as additionally insured and to include a waiver of subrogation. MOA risk management shall confirm that current policies conform with MOA standards of risk management. Additionally, MOA legal shall review any operating subcontracts and customer agreements for additional risk exposure such as workman's compensation and other physical risks and potential liabilities. This compliance requirement shall occur prior to December 31st of 2016. And my logic in there is if they're just writing contracts with folks, are we cognizant that that employee needs workman's compensation coverage? Have they bound the municipality to a risk environment that's inappropriate? If we've gotten away from this oversight requirement through negligence or lack of communication or whatever, I want to make sure that they haven't got us bound because it's a municipal facility that something potentially could go wrong or a lawsuit results because we weren't watching it. And so the idea that waiver of subrogation is part of the contract, but I think that the unknowns are also are other situations arising with employees or subcontractors on other places. And if not, fine. But I think risk management's another area where we can expose them to the need to be professional and run it like a business. So risk management needs to get involved a little bit from that perspective.
Can I jump in on that?
Good, John.
Just since you're on there. One thing, to me, the biggest liability is risk, is this insurance liability. If something happened there in a sports facility. So if that's not squared up, so this date of December 31 seems like it's...
Well, that's true, and I'll just do one more point, and then I'll leave it to legal to explain what the subrogation clause means from that perspective. It's not additionally insured necessarily, but the subrogation clause has a little bit different connotation in that, so you can just hold that for a second. So the last one is sort of the accountability back to us as a body, and so that statement or request would be a formal presentation of contract compliance and general annual operating overview shall be made to the Assembly at one of our regular meetings prior to December 31st of 2016. An additional presentation shall be presented to the Eagle River Parks and Rec Board prior to January 31st of 2017. What I was hoping there is they got the message today, they followed the things, and they can come to us before December 31st and say all is well. Ideally, as well as an expanded conversation about programs and question and answer period. Ideally, I'd still like them to do that, but in a way that, hey, we heard the message, we fixed it, and we've got it corrected. I think we see annual reports given to us by other folks that we support at the Assembly. Commissions and boards do that. It's not unusual for this board to come and say, hey, thanks for the contract we're managing facilities or middle weight facilities this way, and we have that. So I'm almost wondering if that should be an annual presentation, both from this arena operator and perhaps even some of the contract compliance with SMG to hear how they're doing. I digress even further, is that SMG was criticized on my watch why they weren't promoting concerts and why they weren't trying to generate more revenue for an empty facility. We're leaning towards the same thing. Twice I've gone in there trying to interact with people, and lights are off, there's nobody in there. It's like, this is a great facility. People should be in there playing cards and running track and all the other stuff. So, some of the interesting conversation is to say, hey, get your revenues up, give us some more of the revenues, and promote the place. It's brand new. So I leave it at that. I don't know that this is the right answer. There may be other suggestions, maybe somewhere in the middle. I don't know what it looks like. But I'm personally getting a little bit frustrated. I know John Rada is currently caught as contract administrator in place. And the last comment on that, I ramble, is that I had a conversation with Chris Schutte, who is John Rada's boss, about moving the contract administration into the municipality proper in the 8th floor with Chris Schutte himself. I don't think so. I thought I was going to do that first, but the contract administration involves pretty significantly the Chugiak Eagle River Parks and Rec Board and the taxation strictly from the mill rate collected in Chugiak Eagle River. So I'm not sure we would gain anything. I certainly don't fault John Rada in this from a contract administration perspective, or the help that he has to keep the place running. That's where I don't feel that we have too many deficiencies in that. But I'm concerned about his effectiveness limited outside of his own ability to get the board to talk and perform. So that's what I kind of propose, but I need to know more on what we can do. Do we want to notice a breach now, or do we want to do something different?
Let me go to LB next.
I don't have anything else to say.
You had a question for internal audit.
Did I?
You want to know what internal audit thought about these recommendations?
I thought you were going to answer that question. Thank you.
You asked me.
I thought you were. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's your thoughts?
Ms. Gray Jackson to the chair. We're fine with these. The second to the last recommendation about violated Title VII, I'm not sure if the contract, and maybe Mr. Dwyer can answer this, if the contract requires them to comply with Title VII.
It's my understanding that no, the contractors are not required to comply with Title VII. In fact, SMG lets out contracts for the pension sanitary arenas without compliance with 7. Although we do, under those contracts as well, have the opportunity to review subs or assignments under over 10,000 bucks.
Yeah, it's over 10,000, and then there is a requirement to report those expenditures to the Chugiak Eagle River Board. So in some regard, again, it was sort of making sure that they understood that, and then if there is exposure under Section Title VII, that we watch that. So really trying to put the our staff and our resources to their disposal. So if they have a question, hey, this is over 10,000 bucks, what are we supposed to do? At the very least, they're supposed to notify the Chugiak Eagle River Board. The contract says if they have a non-budgeted item, they're supposed to get approval of that first, either from the contract administrator or the board, which is one of the same in some of those purchases. So you just can't have them spending money outside of the budget because it's all in that place.
Thanks.
Legal? Your impression on this?
My impression is I like it. My initial concern though is we're trying to change the culture that's developed over the past years. I wonder if one appointed liaison is enough, or whether or not we need to engage more board members to reverse course and have now an increased dialogue. Other than that, I like everyone. I think it's a great approach. I think trying to work with them rather than against them is, again, I think with your background, it's appropriate.
Jim had just joined us. Are you on the board for the, Barbara? Is he on the board?
I heard your point. Again, you can see, in answering you up, that you can see a little bit of frustration in getting the talk to occur. So short of going to their board meeting, which I certainly can do, I don't know how to intercede that. It leaves a lot up to the contract administrator to develop that dialogue. And we heard it from John at the audit committee meeting. He's reaching out for help. So if you had a way to do it, certainly a legal letter or some, hey, by the way, you're in breach, gets people's attention and lends itself to the authority of it all. I have wandered into the McDonald Center trying to reach out to Reed McDonald and do that. He was on a vacation for 8 days to New York when I was there for the audit committee meeting, and I thought we would encourage him to come to this meeting as well. I'm pretty sure he got the notice. I doubt they didn't know about it. So I'm all over multiple liaisons. At this point, I'd be happy with just one.
Yes, sir.
Once again, let me correct, but to follow up on the point, these are insignificant events of people, and that's probably the wrong term. I meant to say that they're insignificant from the context that they are curable.
Right.
They're able to be cured. Now, again, $30,000 by December 31, I don't know if that can be cured, but we'll find out. But I think the overall tenor of this approach submitted by Mr. Starr is to work with these guys unless and until they demonstrate to us that they're not willing or able to work with us. I think, and how to approach them, whether or not we go out there, or we invite the board here, or we invite 1 or 3, that I leave that to you, Mr.
Can I comment on that?
Go ahead, sir. We have 15 minutes left.
What I would like, if it was my business, I would reach out probably to legal, and I would say, hey, on October 20th, we had a combined assembly meeting. You were requested to attend, and here's what we discussed, and here's what findings were based on that, and we would like you to contact somebody by, November 15th, whether that's your office or whoever, chair of rules committee or somebody, getting a letter, make sure they got it, and the authority is ramped up by that. They got a cursory, they got quasi communication from me and John. They knew about the audit committee meeting, he wasn't in town, so we've done all the casual type of stuff, and my take would be somebody needs to write them a letter that says, hey, this happened on October 21st, the findings were this. There's a signature line on this, which I was hoping, it's a little uncomfortable to take action inside of the committee, but I wanted it to be signed and make part of the record that they said, okay, we'll do all this. That was my goal today, but you gotta be able to tender to somebody. So quite honestly, I'd rather you guys picked up the lead, and maybe you don't have to threaten that they're in breach, but bring something to their attention.
I would like registered letters sent to each member of the board so they've got documentation to actually receive the notice to be here. Communicate with us. And I've gotten 3 people. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Mr. Starr's recommendation, and what I would suggest, and I'm probably going to say exactly what he said, but maybe in a different way, is that this document be reviewed by you, Mr. Jura, again, and any changes that you think need to be made based on comments from the internal audit, make those changes. Make this an official document, have a cover letter, as Mr. Starr said, that they were asked to be at this meeting after we had an audit committee meeting, and unfortunately they weren't here. Well, this is where we're at on this situation right now, and send the letter certified. that's my recommendation, how to.
To each member.
To each member, go on from here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am.
To that point, Mr. Chairman, do you take votes in your committee here, or?
Yes.
Okay.
John?
Hey, a couple comments. One thing is I've learned that if you want something not to get done, put 2 people in charge. So I'd say get one board, one liaison, and that person's responsible 100%. And then this might be a small thing, but I know in my business when I got to do an additional insurance thing, I text or email my insurance guy, it's done in an hour. So give them 3 months. And it seems to be very important to many people. So I just break that out, that first step, and say, we want this by the end of 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think duly noted. Subrogation, and we're running out of time on what that clause is. I haven't read the contract back to back to know exactly what their insurance requirements are, but risk management, I'm sure know, so maybe I'll follow up with them.
I would break that, or make that a separate bullet point,
Good.
give much shorter time. And then it says Farley Arena Management, can you be more specific, board chair or
Yeah, at this point, I would rather not work with the employee of Fire Lake Management. I'd rather work with the board direct. I mean, they're likely to say, hey, Reed handles all that stuff for us. He's our paid guy. You do it.
Should be the board.
But there may be some of the problem.
So maybe not management, cross that out, say board chair.
Could be.
We're gonna vote on it.
You make an amendment, and I'm happy to do it.
I'd amend that,
I
management,
concur.
make it board chair. And then split paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, first sentence, break that out from the rest and give it a 2-week limit.
I wanted to put on assembly stationery as well, so we'll go forward.
Those are my amendments. Clear enough?
We're gonna get there. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, it seems to me that they probably want to continue to manage it, and that's a good thing. But what also is clear is that they need professional management. So either we hire or they hire, and we can help select or whatever, professional management to help them set up and internalize policies and procedures that will make them successful going forward. And so it's an assistance thing as opposed to a big hammer that's coming down and saying, you guys are screwing up big time, but you are. And so I think that we ought to help them, and maybe SMG is the people to go to have in place a manager for at least a year to assist them in establishing those programs. And I think that would be helpful on our part, and it would give them the tools. If they don't want to do that, then we can just go to a professional management firm.
That's some of the conversation that we had with the contract administrator as well. He called it up in their game and getting right.
But we need to help them by getting somebody that we know, some professional, and it's not appropriate to put John in that mix. I mean, he can help from his position as them, but.
We got one more, and then we're going to start on this. One last comment from you, then we'll get started on this.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I agree with Mr. Steele that I don't think we need to come with a hammer at this point. They don't have a history of doing this for years and years and years. They have let things slip a little bit this time, and I think we just need to provide a reminder that this isn't up to snuff. We expect, that these things should be done, and they need to follow their contract. And there are other things that we could do if this type of behavior continues. But I don't think we want to send them a thing saying, hey, you're in breach of contract, or we're going to, let's go easy on them the first time, and then if they don't come back with what we consider to be the proper reaction, we can get tougher the next time.
Well, I want to disclose just briefly, there is a history, quite frankly. Back in the conversation I talked about Mr. Vikalis wanting to go out for bids on the contract when it came new, was partly because it was that the facility wasn't up to the professional standards thereof. And so his recommendation was he didn't feel like that was the case. And so John and I, and Amy to a degree with Debbie following up, was let us fix our own issues here. So the facility and the conditions for that, as well as some of these items, have been revisited. And that's why we called for this audit to be on the plan, was as a double check that some of these things were problems before had gotten fixed. some things have gotten fixed, but they've got all new ice systems, so there's, don't infer on the record that there hasn't been problems before, is what I'm trying to say, is that they haven't been all as well. When we sole sourced the contract, it was because we wanted to get in there and fix things. And to some degree, we've been successful, but in others, we haven't been. So,
Okay, well, let's get a motion on this letter in front of us to adopt it. Second, then we'll make amendments on it.
well, the corrections would be to put it on assembly letterhead, bisect, the motion then would be to bisect the fourth paragraph into two separate compliance requirements. And then the inference is that board management accepts the terms and conditions thereof. The date on the insurance, I would want risk management to review that, but I can do that outside of, if it's a pending risk, we have that obligation to fix it anyhow. But I can modify some of the dates. So that's my motion.
Is there a second on that?
Second.
Any other changes? Amy, anything?
No, I agree with Bill.
Okay, all in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Nope. Amy agreed, so that's passed.
Can we
I want to
talk
tell you
about
guys-
the course of action? Are we in agreement that the attorney's office or
Yes.
legal office is going to package the conversation?
I want
Be
to
sure you
know legal
reference that this
terminology.
tape is available if they want to hear it. If you can, reference that and then attach this approved criterion once we get it drafted, corrected. And then put a timeline on response.
I want
back to
registered
you.
letters sent to all of them, so they can't say we didn't know about it. Ms. Greg Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment for the record. This is a committee of the whole, and in my opinion, and I'm going to look to Bill Paul to respond. In my opinion, as a committee of the whole, we can make motions and we can vote on motions, and that's what we just did. Mr. Palsy, do you have a comment on what I believe we were able to do and we did as a committee of the whole? Thank you.
Chair, I believe that is correct.
Thank you, that's all I needed to hear. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I will tell you, years ago, I belonged to something called the Good Old Boys Flying Club, it used to be the Air National Guard. And we used to fly our planes with baggage on it. And one time a photo came out of a boat put inside the airplane. There wasn't much we would not do at that time. So the Air Guard got corrected. AGB got called and that got corrected. We used to have our own fish camp we would fly out to. That got corrected. Every organization at some point in time has to be just helped along the way. And this one's no. Mr. Evans?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify the conversation between Mr. Paulson and Ms. Gray Jackson. Certainly the committee has the ability, the committee of the whole or even a lesser committee, but it's just a committee's decision. Just because it's a committee of the whole doesn't make it an assembly action. I just want to make sure that was what you were asking. This was not an action of the assembly, even if this is committee of the whole.
Yeah, what is your point?
Well, I thought you were asking Mr. Falsey if by us taking the vote in this committee of the whole, it was equivalent to being an action of the assembly, and I don't believe it is.
I'll hear from Mr. Paulson first, if you don't mind.
Mr.
Through
Halsey?
the chair, and this is why I had my hand raised up, because there was a further clarification that I probably should have raised before the vote was taken, just that it's my understanding that committee actions are advisory or recommendatory. So that raises the question of what I probably should have interceded with before the vote was taken, which is exactly what form of action did the committee think it was taking? I suspect the formal way to handle this is that the assembly committee would be recommending to the administration and the contract administrator that a notice should be sent to the party that grounds for default exist, that we wish to seek them cured, and we would like them to agree to these terms, to terms along these lines, else we would find the need to declare a substantial default. I think if it's a recommendation to us, then that works. I'm not certain there's a role for this that be presented as a contract between the chair of the rules committee and the planning board.
Yeah, what I interpreted was our vote was really, did you agree with the terms and conditions and the policy call of what we're going to do? And then the inference on the conversation that I had was, what are we going to do about it? And if you guys are saying that it's a good recommendation, we're going to do that, but I don't know that it's really an action in the assembly. They could choose not to. But I think what my vote was, or the vote I was happy to have was, did you agree with those, the amended document, and that become the basis for further action that they can take or not take. That's what I think.
Ms. Green-Jackson.
Thank you, and just to follow up, and thank you for your comments, because I didn't necessarily mean that our vote was not on the assembly, because it wasn't an official assembly meeting, it's a committee meeting. But so many, often folks say, oh, we can't vote at a committee meeting, and we can. You know, it's a committee recommendation, as Mr. Bolton just said. So I just wanted to make that clarification. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, we move forward. This meeting's over with. Thanks for being here.